As they reached the corner of her street, she paused for a moment, taking in the familiar view. The neighborhood was peaceful now, with the quiet hum of everyday life filling the air. It had been a hard journey, one filled with fear and uncertainty, but Simone had come out stronger. She had faced down danger and uncertainty, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but empowered. The phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an update from the detective she had been working with. The final gang members had been apprehended, and the operation to bring down their network had been successful. Simone had played a pivotal role in all of it. The journey had been dangerous and painful, but it had also led her to discover the depths of her own strength. She had learned that survival wasn't just about staying safe. It was about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Simone smiled to herself. She had no idea what the future would bring, but one thing was certain: she was ready for it. The gang had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. And as she walked back into her house, Max trotting proudly beside her, Simone knew that she was no longer just a woman in a neighborhood. She was a force to be reckoned with. And anyone who thought they could threaten her again would find out just how wrong they were. Certainly, here's a human-centric, compelling and policy-compliant introduction. It was a bright Saturday morning in Evergreen, a small, sleepy town where everyone seemed to know everyone, or so they thought. Birds chirped overhead as the sun peeked through the thick canopy of oak trees lining the streets. Residents were out mowing lawns, chatting over picket fences, and enjoying the simple rhythm of life. But beneath the town's postcard-perfect exterior, unspoken tensions simmered, occasionally bubbling to the surface in ways no one ever expected. Emma Clark, a middle-aged white woman with a sharp bob haircut and a tendency to keep her nose in everyone else's business, stood on her front porch sipping her morning coffee. Her gaze swept over her perfectly manicured lawn before it landed on a moving truck parked next door. A sense of unease prickled at her. She hadn't seen the new neighbors arrive, but now she noticed a car in the driveway and a few boxes being carried into the house. Emma's curiosity quickly turned into judgment. The woman she spotted unloading the boxes, a tall, confident black woman with a striking presence, didn't look like the kind of person Emma was used to seeing in Evergreen. Something about her demeanor bothered Emma, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Or maybe she just didn't want to. By mid-afternoon, Emma had worked herself into a quiet frenzy. She watched her new neighbor come and go, interacting with movers, occasionally stopping to greet other neighbors who passed by. The woman carried herself with authority, her head held high as if she belonged. No, *owned *, the very ground she walked on. Emma muttered under her breath. Who does she think she is? When the moving truck finally pulled away and the street grew quiet, Emma decided to act. She picked up her phone, dialed 911, and reported what she described as suspicious activity. I don't know who she is, but she's just moving around like she owns the place, Emma said, her voice laced with a mix of indignation and something darker. The dispatcher, trying to de-escalate, asked for more information, but Emma's tone only grew sharper. I'm not saying anything, but shouldn't someone check this out? Unbeknownst to Emma, her call was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the foundations of her quiet little town. Across town, the new neighbor, Dr. Olivia Brooks, was sitting on her couch, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the comforting aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Olivia had recently returned to Evergreen, the town where she'd spent summers with her grandmother as a child. She had her reasons for coming back, big reasons, though she wasn't the type to boast about them. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. Unknown caller, it read. Olivia hesitated for a moment before answering. This is Dr. Brooks, she said, her voice steady and professional. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. Dr. Brooks, this is Officer Sanchez with the Evergreen Police Department. We received a report about some activity at your property and wanted to follow up. Oh, be happy to discuss this matter, but I'd also suggest checking with the town's leadership before proceeding any further. Let me save you some trouble. I am the leadership. Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Officer Sanchez hesitated, clearly caught off guard. You're saying you're Officer Sanchez, she replied, her tone measured. I appreciate your call. I'll be happy to discuss this matter, but I also suggest checking with the town's leadership before proceeding any further. Let me save you some trouble. I am the leadership. This wasn't Olivia's first encounter with people like Emma. She had spent years navigating similar situations, moments filled with quiet hostility, assumptions, and unspoken judgments. Yet this one carried a bitter irony. Olivia had been elected as Evergreen's mayor just weeks ago, though the official announcement had been subdued. She'd assumed, wrongly it seemed, that word had already reached everyone in the small town. She stepped back from the window, shaking her head with a quiet chuckle. Welcome home, she muttered to herself, her voice tinged with equal parts humor and resignation. Evergreen had always held a mix of fond and complicated memories for her. Summers spent here with her grandmother were warm and full of laughter, but the town had its undercurrents, ones she had hoped to change when she decided to run for mayor. As Olivia unpacked another box, her mind drifted to the moment she decided to return. Her grandmother's health had begun to decline, and while Olivia had built a successful career in urban development, she felt a pull to come back, to make a difference in the town that had shaped her early years. Winning the election was proof that change was possible, but days like this reminded her just how much work lay ahead. Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Officer Sanchez hesitated, clearly caught off guard. You're saying you're... Yes, Olivia interrupted, her voice calm but unyielding. I'm Olivia Brooks, the newly elected mayor of Evergreen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some unpacking to do. As she ended the call, Olivia leaned back on the couch and let out a long breath. She knew this was just the beginning. There were battles ahead, some small, some monumental, but she was ready. What she didn't know was just how quickly those battles would arrive at her doorstep. Meanwhile, across the street, Emma peered through her blinds, still watching Olivia's house. She had no idea who she'd just tangled with, or how much her own life was about to change. The quiet of the neighborhood was deceiving. Beneath the serene suburban setting of Evergreen, a storm was quietly brewing. Inside her cozy, still-cuttered home, Olivia Brooks stood at the window, watching the world beyond the curtains. She could see her neighbor's blinds twitching slightly, the faint movement giving away the watchful eyes behind them. Olivia didn't need confirmation. She knew exactly who was watching. Across the street, Emma Clark was pacing in her living room, her coffee long gone cold on the table. The conversation with the police had left her unsettled. Something about the way the officer had responded, hesitant, almost nervous, didn't sit right with her. Who was this woman, really? And why hadn't anyone mentioned her before? Emma wasn't a bad person, or at least she didn't think of herself as one. She liked to believe she had the town's best interests at heart. But deep down, she knew she had a habit of jumping to conclusions, of letting her own insecurities shape how she saw others. And right now, Olivia Brooks wasn't just a new neighbor. She was an enigma, a question Emma couldn't answer. Still, Emma wasn't ready to let it go. She reached for her phone again, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she wanted. Linda Harper. Linda knew everyone and everything in Evergreen, and if anyone could shed light on this mysterious new arrival, it was her. Linda, it's Emma, she began, her voice casual but laced with curiosity. Have you heard anything about the new folks next door to me? A tall, black woman, seems a bit, I don't know, different. On the other end of the line, Linda paused before answering. Oh, you mean Olivia Brooks. She's the new mayor, Emma. Just moved in last week. Emma froze, her stomach sinking. Mayor, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Mayor, Linda replied, her tone carrying a hint of amusement. She won the election last month. Didn't you watch the news? She's a real go-getter. Grew up spending summers here with her grandmother. It's a big deal for Evergreen, you know. Emma barely registered the rest of what Linda was saying. Her mind raced, replaying every moment from earlier in the day, the phone call, the things she'd said. A wave of embarrassment washed over her as the realization sank in. She hadn't just called the police on a random stranger, she'd called them on the town's new leader. And so, as the lights in the neighborhood began to flicker off one by one, two women, each carrying their own burdens and perspectives, prepared for whatever came next, unaware of how intertwined their paths were about to become. The next morning, the town woke up to a buzz of activity. The quiet, small-town energy of Evergreen was beginning to shift as the reality of having a new mayor settled in. While many residents were eager for the fresh ideas and progress Olivia Brooks promised, there were those who weren't as welcoming. The unease wasn't always spoken aloud, but it rippled through conversations in hushed tones and subtle glances exchanged over morning coffee at the local diner. Livia stood in her kitchen, savoring the first sip of her coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. She glanced at her calendar, which was already filling up with meetings and community events. Today, she had plans to visit the town square and meet with a few local business owners. She knew earning the trust of Evergreen's residents would take time and effort, but Olivia wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Across the street, Emma sat at her kitchen table, staring at her own cup of coffee, now untouched and lukewarm. Sleep had been elusive the night before, her mind consumed with thoughts of her new neighbor. Emma knew she'd overstepped, but admitting that, to herself, let alone to Olivia, wasn't something she was ready to do. Instead, she found herself scanning social media, hoping to find some detail about Olivia that might make her feel justified in her initial reaction. What Emma discovered only deepened her unease. Olivia's accomplishments were impressive. A doctorate in urban planning, years of experience revitalizing struggling communities, and now the distinction of being Evergreen's first Black mayor. But rather than seeing these achievements as inspiring, Emma felt a knot of insecurity tighten in her chest. Olivia was everything Emma wasn't: confident, accomplished, and unapologetically herself. At the town square, Olivia's presence didn't go unnoticed. She greeted shopkeepers warmly, asking about their businesses and listening attentively as they shared their concerns. Many were cautiously optimistic, though some maintained a reserved distance. Olivia could feel the weight of their expectations and their doubts, but she met each interaction with grace and determination. As she walked past the local hardware store, a man in his late 60s stepped out onto the sidewalk, wiping his hands on a rag. His name was Hank, and he'd run the store for decades, becoming a fixture in the community. He eyed Olivia with a mix of curiosity and skepticism before offering a gruff nod. "Mayor Brooks," he said, his voice tinged with a southern drawl. "Heard you were in town." Olivia extended her hand, her smile unwavering. "Mr. Hank, I presume. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard great things about your store." Hank hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand. "Folks round here don't take kindly to change, you know. But I reckon we'll see how things go." Olivia nodded, her gaze steady. "I understand, and I don't take that lightly. I'm here to listen and to work with you all to make Evergreen better for everyone." Hank studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Well, I suppose time will tell." Back in the neighborhood, Emma decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air might clear her mind. As she strolled past Olivia's house, she noticed a group of kids playing in the front yard, their laughter echoing through the street. A woman, likely a family friend, was helping them set up a game of hopscotch, her warm smile contrasting sharply with Emma's uneasy mood. Emma quickened her pace, hoping to avoid any interaction, but her path crossed with another neighbor, Carol, who was out walking her dog. Carol waved enthusiastically, stopping to chat. "Have you met Olivia yet?" Carol asked, her tone cheerful. "She's amazing. I talked to her at the park yesterday, and she has such great ideas for the town. Can you believe we finally have a mayor who's actually interested in what we have to say?" Emma forced a polite smile, her discomfort growing. "I've seen her around," she said vaguely, hoping to change the subject. Carol didn't seem to notice Emma's hesitation. "Well, I think she's exactly what Evergreen needs. It's about time we had someone with a fresh perspective." As the day wore on, Emma found herself retreating further into her own thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that the town was shifting in a way she didn't fully understand or control. And though she hated to admit it, part of her resentment toward Olivia wasn't about who Olivia was, but about what she represented. Meanwhile, Olivia was settling into her role as mayor. But the challenges were becoming more apparent with each passing day. Some residents were openly supportive, eager to see change, while others remained distant, their skepticism palpable. Olivia knew it would take more than words to win over the doubters. She needed to show them that her vision for Evergreen wasn't just ambitious, it was achievable. That evening, Olivia attended a town hall meeting, her first public event since moving into the neighborhood. The room was packed, the air buzzing with a mix of curiosity and tension. As Olivia took the stage, she scanned the crowd, her gaze briefly landing on Emma, who sat near the back, arms crossed and expression guarded. "Good evening, everyone," Olivia began, her voice steady and confident. "Thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I know that change can be uncomfortable, and I understand that many of you have questions about what the future holds for Evergreen. I want you to know that I'm here to listen, to learn, and to work with each of you to make our town a place we're all proud to call home." Her words were met with polite applause, though the undercurrent of doubt lingered. Throughout the meeting, Olivia fielded questions about everything from road repairs to education funding. She answered each one thoughtfully, her expertise and sincerity shining through. But as the night wore on, it became clear that not everyone was convinced. A few pointed comments from residents hinted at deeper tensions, ones rooted in fear of change and resistance to progress. Olivia handled them with grace, but she could feel the weight of their skepticism pressing down on her. As the meeting came to a close, Olivia thanked the crowd for their time and encouraged them to reach out with any additional questions or concerns. The room began to empty, but Emma lingered, her gaze fixed on Olivia as she gathered her notes. For a moment, Emma considered approaching her neighbor, perhaps even offering an apology, but the thought of admitting she'd been wrong felt too daunting. Instead, she turned and walked out, the tension between them unresolved and growing stronger with each passing day. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars scattered across a dark sky. Olivia stood by the steps of the town hall, watching as the last few attendees filed out. She knew she was making progress, but the road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't yet predict. And somewhere in the shadows of Evergreen, the seeds of conflict continued to grow, their roots intertwining in ways that neither Olivia nor Emma could fully see or yet understand. The following morning dawned with a haze of dew clinging to the fields surrounding Evergreen, the town stirring slowly but with a palpable undercurrent of curiosity and tension. Word of the town hall meeting had spread, with various interpretations of Olivia's performance weaving through coffee shops and sidewalks. Some praised her poise and clarity, while others clung to a narrative of distrust, claiming she hadn't provided enough concrete answers. Emma stood at her kitchen sink, washing the remnants of her breakfast plate as snippets of last night's meeting replayed in her mind. Olivia's calm demeanor had been infuriatingly hard to dismiss. Even Emma had to admit that Olivia had a way of speaking that commanded attention, and her responses to the tougher questions had been measured, thoughtful. But Emma's resistance wasn't rooted in logic, it was emotional, tied to a discomfort she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. Across town, Olivia prepared for another day of immersion into the life of Evergreen. Her to-do list was daunting. A meeting with the school board to discuss outdated facilities, a lunch with the head of the local chamber of commerce, and an afternoon visit to the youth center to speak with teens about their concerns. As she tied her scarf and grabbed her notebook, Olivia felt the weight of expectations settle over her shoulders like an invisible cloak. She couldn't afford to falter. Olivia stared at the note, her heart pounding. She had faced intimidation before, but it never got easier. Folding the note, she resolved not to let fear dictate her actions. She had come to Evergreen with a mission, and she wasn't about to let threats, whether whispered or written, derail her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, the unease that had been simmering beneath the surface began to bubble over. In living rooms and on front porches, conversations turned more pointed, the lines between allies and adversaries becoming clearer. And as Olivia prepared for another day of challenges, Emma sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the weight of her choices pressing heavily on her chest. Both women, in their own ways, stood at a crossroads, their paths intertwined yet divided by a chasm of misunderstanding. And while neither could see it yet, the events unfolding in Evergreen were setting the stage for a confrontation that would force them, and the town, to confront truths long buried in the shadows. The morning air was crisp, a cool breeze hinting at the change of seasons as the town slowly came to life. Olivia stood by her living room window, sipping her coffee and staring at the note she'd found in her mailbox the night before. The words, though simple, carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. She wondered who could have written it. Was it someone from the neighborhood? A disgruntled resident from the town? Or perhaps someone who simply didn't want her here? The possibilities churned in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She had work to do, and she wouldn't allow fear to dictate her actions. Across the street, Emma stood on her front porch, clutching her mug as she watched Olivia's silhouette through the window. She hadn't seen the note, but something about Olivia's demeanor that morning seemed different, more guarded, less at ease. Emma felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it guilt, curiosity, or perhaps a mixture of both? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It wasn't her problem. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Later that day, Olivia met with the town council to discuss the upcoming budget proposal. It was a routine meeting on the surface, but the undercurrents of tension were palpable. As Olivia presented her plans to allocate funds toward educational programs and infrastructure improvements, she noticed a few council members exchanging glances. Their skepticism was expected, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something else was brewing. After the meeting, one of the council members, a man named Richard, approached her in the hallway. Richard had always been cordial but distant, his politeness masking a thinly veiled wariness of her. "Mayor Brooks," he began, his tone measured. "I wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some chatter among certain folks in town. Not everyone is thrilled with the changes you're proposing." Olivia met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "I expected resistance, Richard. Change isn't easy, especially in a town like Evergreen. But I'm here to work with the community, not against it." Richard nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Just be careful. People can get unpredictable when they feel threatened." Olivia thanked him for the warning, but as she walked to her car, a knot of unease settled in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's words carried more weight than he was letting on. Meanwhile, Emma's day took an unexpected turn when she received a call from her younger brother, Sam, who lived in the next town over. Sam was a journalist, and his tone was serious as he asked, "Emma, have you heard about the backlash Olivia Brooks is facing?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "There's a group stirring up trouble," Sam explained. "They're spreading rumors about her, trying to undermine her credibility. I thought you'd want to know, given everything." Emma bristled. "Given what?" Sam hesitated before replying. "Given that you've had your own reservations about her, I just thought you'd want to be aware of what's going on." After the call ended, Emma felt a wave of discomfort. She hadn't been part of any organized effort against Olivia, but the idea that others were actively working to sabotage her neighbor didn't sit right. For all her own misgivings, Emma wasn't sure she wanted to see Olivia fail. Not like this, not because of. Olivia stared at the note, her heart pounding. She had faced intimidation before, but it never got easier. Folding the note, she resolved not to let fear dictate her actions. She had come to Evergreen with a mission, and she wasn't about to let threats, whether whispered or written, derail her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, the unease that had been simmering beneath the surface began to bubble over. In living rooms and on front porches, conversations turned more pointed, the lines between allies and adversaries becoming clearer. And as Olivia prepared for another day of challenges, Emma sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the weight of her choices pressing heavily on her chest. Both women, in their own ways, stood at a crossroads, their paths intertwined yet divided by a chasm of misunderstanding. And while neither could see it yet, the events unfolding in Evergreen were setting the stage for a confrontation that would force them, and the town, to confront truths long buried in the shadows. The morning air was crisp, a cool breeze hinting at the change of seasons as the town slowly came to life. Olivia stood by her living room window, sipping her coffee and staring at the note she'd found in her mailbox the night before. The words, though simple, carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. She wondered who could have written it. Was it someone from the neighborhood? A disgruntled resident from the town? Or perhaps someone who simply didn't want her here? The possibilities churned in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She had work to do, and she wouldn't allow fear to dictate her actions. Across the street, Emma stood on her front porch, clutching her mug as she watched Olivia's silhouette through the window. She hadn't seen the note, but something about Olivia's demeanor that morning seemed different, more guarded, less at ease. Emma felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it guilt, curiosity, or perhaps a mixture of both? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It wasn't her problem. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Later that day, Olivia met with the town council to discuss the upcoming budget proposal. It was a routine meeting on the surface, but the undercurrents of tension were palpable. As Olivia presented her plans to allocate funds toward educational programs and infrastructure improvements, she noticed a few council members exchanging glances. Their skepticism was expected, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something else was brewing. After the meeting, one of the council members, a man named Richard, approached her in the hallway. Richard had always been cordial but distant, his politeness masking a thinly veiled wariness of her. "Mayor Brooks," he began, his tone measured. "I wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some chatter among certain folks in town. Not everyone is thrilled with the changes you're proposing." Olivia met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "I expected resistance, Richard. Change isn't easy, especially in a town like Evergreen. But I'm here to work with the community, not against it." Richard nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Just be careful. People can get unpredictable when they feel threatened." Olivia thanked him for the warning, but as she walked to her car, a knot of unease settled in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's words carried more weight than he was letting on. Meanwhile, Emma's day took an unexpected turn when she received a call from her younger brother, Sam, who lived in the next town over. Sam was a journalist, and his tone was serious as he asked, "Emma, have you heard about the backlash Olivia Brooks is facing?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "There's a group stirring up trouble," Sam explained. "They're spreading rumors about her, trying to undermine her credibility. I thought you'd want to know, given everything." Emma bristled. "Given what?" Sam hesitated before replying. "Given that you've had your own reservations about her, I just thought you'd want to be aware of what's going on." After the call ended, Emma felt a wave of discomfort. She hadn't been part of any organized effort against Olivia, but the idea that others were actively working to sabotage her neighbor didn't sit right. For all her own misgivings, Emma wasn't sure she wanted to see Olivia fail. Not like this, not because of that evening. As Olivia prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the note she'd received, accompanied by a message, "This is just the beginning. Watch your back." Her breath caught as she stared at the screen. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just trying to intimidate her. They wanted her to know they were watching. Olivia's mind raced as she considered her options. Reporting it to the police felt like the logical step, but would they take it seriously? And even if they did, would it change anything? She had no proof of who was behind the messages, no leads to follow. Across the street, Emma sat in her living room, scrolling through social media. A local forum had become a hot of debate over Olivia's policies, with some users voicing support and others spreading misinformation. One post in particular caught Emma's attention, a photo of Olivia leaving the youth center, captioned with the words, "Is this who we want leading our town?" The comments ranged from supportive to downright hateful, and Emma felt a pang of unease. This wasn't just opposition, it was personal. Unable to sit idly by, Emma decided to take a walk to clear her head. As she stepped outside, she noticed Olivia standing on her porch, staring out at the street with a distant look in her eyes. For a moment, Emma considered walking over, perhaps striking up a conversation, but the weight of their unspoken tension held her back. Just as Emma turned to leave, a car sped down the street, its tires screeching as it passed Olivia's house. A loud, mocking shout rang out from the open window, followed by laughter that faded into the distance. Olivia didn't flinch, but Emma saw the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the way her grip on the porch railing tightened. For the first time, Emma felt a flicker of empathy for her neighbor. Olivia wasn't just the confident, accomplished woman Emma had painted her to be. She was a person, navigating challenges and hostility that Emma couldn't fully understand. And while Emma wasn't ready to confront her own role in the dynamics of their neighborhood, she couldn't deny that something bigger was unfolding in Evergreen, something that neither she nor Olivia could ignore. As the night deepened, the town seemed to hold its breath, the tension thick in the air. Behind closed doors and glowing screens, conversations simmered, alliances formed, and suspicions grew. And in the quiet spaces between, both Olivia and Emma found themselves standing on the edge of an unseen precipice, the ground beneath them shifting with every passing moment. The days following the mysterious text were anything but calm. Olivia kept her composure during public appearances, but at home she double-checked the locks and left her porch light on through the night. The unease was a constant hum in the back of her mind, but she refused to let it deter her. Evergreen's next town hall was approaching, and Olivia knew this would be a pivotal moment to address the growing unrest directly. Across the street, Emma wrestled with a mix of emotions she couldn't untangle. The things she'd seen and heard, the late-night drive-by shouts, the online smear campaigns, left her unsettled. She found herself keeping an eye on Olivia's house, not out of suspicion, but out of something closer to concern. It was an unfamiliar feeling, and she wasn't sure what to do with it. The night of the town hall arrived, and the air was electric with anticipation. The community center was packed, with residents spilling into the aisles and standing along the walls. Olivia stood at the front of the room, her calm expression masking the tension she felt inside. She glanced at her notes one last time before stepping up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I know there's been a lot of conversation and some concern about the changes happening in our town. I want to take this opportunity to address those concerns and to hear directly from you." Her opening was met with polite applause, but the room buzzed with unease. As Olivia spoke about her vision for Evergreen, highlighting plans for local business support, improved schools, and community programs, she noticed a man standing near the back of the room. His expression was hard, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Olivia had seen him before, though she couldn't place where. He wasn't a regular at council meetings, and his body language screamed opposition. When the floor opened for questions, he was the first to speak. His tone was sharp, his words laced with thinly veiled hostility as he questioned Olivia's qualifications and accused her of overstepping her authority. The crowd grew tense, murmurs rippling through the room. Olivia held her ground, responding calmly and factually, but the exchange left a chill in the air. Emma, sitting near the middle of the room, found herself watching Olivia closely. For the first time, she saw the strain in her neighbor's eyes, the weight of what she was carrying. Emma's heart sank as she realized how much of her own prejudice had blinded her to Olivia's humanity. As the meeting continued, the tension reached a boiling point when another resident, emboldened by the man's outburst, stood up and began shouting about changes to the town's zoning laws. The room erupted into chaos, with voices overlapping and accusations flying. Olivia raised her hands, calling for calm, but the noise drowned her out. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the room. The door swung open, and a police officer stepped inside, his expression grim. "Mayor Brooks," he called, his voice cutting through the clamor. "We need to speak with you." The room fell silent as Olivia stepped down from the stage, confusion and concern etched on her face. The officer led her into a small office down the hall, away from the crowd. There, he handed her a folder. Inside was a series of printouts, emails, social media posts, and surveillance images, all linked to a coordinated effort to discredit her. The orchestrator, Richard, the council member who had warned her to be careful. Back in the main hall, Emma sat frozen, her mind racing. She didn't know what was happening, but the shift in the room was palpable. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging theories and gossip. Emma felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to stand up, to say something, anything, that might shift the energy. Before she could act, Olivia returned, her expression a mix of resolve and exhaustion. She addressed the crowd directly, sharing the information she'd just received. "It has come to my attention that certain individuals have been working to undermine my efforts as your mayor, not because of my policies, but because of who I am. I won't stand for this, and neither should you. Evergreen deserves better." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. And then, to everyone's surprise, Emma stood. Her voice wavered at first, but she spoke with conviction. "She's right," Emma said. "We've let fear and ignorance dictate how we treat each other, and it has to stop. I've been guilty of it myself, and I'm ashamed. But if we want this town to thrive, we need to move forward together." A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd, but then slowly applause began to build. Olivia met Emma's gaze, a hint of gratitude softening her expression. The night ended on a hopeful note, though the challenges ahead were far from over. Later that evening, as Olivia returned home, she found a note taped to her door. This one, however, was different. It wasn't threatening or anonymous. It was from Emma. "I'm sorry," it read. "I see you now, and I want to do better." As Olivia stood on her porch, the cool night air wrapping around her, she felt a flicker of hope. Evergreen was far from perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it was a place worth fighting for. The days following the town hall felt different in Evergreen. The air seemed lighter, as if the collective weight of unspoken tensions had begun to lift. Olivia noticed the small changes first: warm smiles from neighbors who had previously looked away, brief but meaningful conversations at the grocery store, and a steady flow of messages from residents expressing their support. It wasn't a complete shift, but it was enough to let her know she was making a difference. Emma, too, felt the change within herself. Writing that note had been a small step, but it felt monumental. She had spent so much time justifying her unease that she hadn't realized how deeply rooted her fears were or how misplaced. The truth was, Olivia's presence had forced Emma to confront parts of herself she'd long avoided. Now, she was determined to do better, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. One evening, Emma decided to walk across the street to Olivia's house. Her heart pounded as she stood on the porch, rehearsing what she wanted to say. Before she could knock, the door opened, and Olivia stood there, looking both surprised and curious. "Hi," Emma said, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to stop by and apologize properly for everything." Olivia raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. Emma took a deep breath and continued. "I was wrong to make assumptions about you, to let my own insecurities and biases get in the way. I see now that you're doing something incredible for this town, and I want to be part of it, if you'll let me." For a moment, Olivia studied Emma's face, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped aside and gestured for Emma to come in. The two women sat in the living room, and for the first time, they talked, not as adversaries, but as neighbors. Emma shared her struggles with feeling disconnected from the changing town, and Olivia spoke candidly about the challenges of stepping into a role where she wasn't always welcome. By the time Emma left, it was clear that while they might never be close friends, they had taken the first step toward understanding each other, and in a small town like Evergreen, that mattered. Meanwhile, the investigation into the smear campaign against Olivia gained traction. Richard, the council member, was forced to resign after the evidence against him became irrefutable. His departure marked a turning point for the town's leadership, allowing Olivia to work more freely without the constant resistance. Though the ordeal had been exhausting, it also solidified Olivia's determination to lead with integrity and transparency. As Olivia continued her work, she focused on the projects that mattered most to the community. She launched an initiative to revitalize the town square, creating a space where residents could gather and celebrate together. She also prioritized funding for local schools, ensuring that every child in Evergreen had access to quality education. These efforts didn't go unnoticed, and over time, even her harshest critics began to see the positive impact of her leadership. One sunny Saturday, Olivia organized a neighborhood block party, a celebration of community and progress. The streets were lined with food trucks and vendor booths, and music filled the air. Families gathered, children played, and for the first time in a long while, Evergreen felt united. Emma volunteered to help set up, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Olivia. The two shared a brief but meaningful exchange as they worked side by side, their unspoken understanding bridging the gap that had once divided them. As the day wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Olivia stood on the makeshift stage in the center of the square. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, and felt a swell of gratitude. "This is what Evergreen is all about," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about coming together, even when it's hard. It's about listening, learning, and growing. I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far, and I'm even more excited for what's to come. Thank you for believing in this town, and in each other." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the streets. In that moment, Olivia felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. She wasn't just the mayor of Evergreen, she was part of its heart and soul. Later that evening, as Olivia sat on her porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, Emma walked over with a plate of cookies. They sat together, talking about everything and nothing, the glow of the streetlights casting a warm halo over the neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, there were still challenges to face, and not everyone had embraced the changes, but it was a start. For Olivia, Evergreen had become more than a town. It was a testament to resilience and the power of community. And for Emma, it was a reminder that growth was possible, even in the most unlikely places. As the stars began to dot the night sky, the two women shared a quiet laugh, the tension that had once defined their relationship now replaced with something far more enduring: hope. In that small town, on that quiet street, the story wasn't just about one woman's journey or one neighborhood's transformation. It was about the possibility of change, messy, imperfect, but ultimately worth it. And for Evergreen, that was enough.